The time has come to talk about stepping out of this chapter of my life. This isn't about revenge. It's about a well-deserved outcome. It's not about holding on to bitterness or fueling the fire of anger. It's about watching the consequences unfold and finding satisfaction in them. My wife, who once claimed she was too beautiful to stay loyal, is now facing the harsh truth. I filed for divorce and walked away from her. I'm a 35-year-old man, and I've known my wife, now 34, since we were in high school. I had just moved to a new city, and high school was a completely fresh start for me. I was afraid I'd struggle to adjust, and it was a valid fear. But fortunately, things weren't as hard as I thought they would be. I quickly made friends, which helped me avoid standing out too much as the new kid. That's when I met Melissa. She was part of the school's photography club. We first crossed paths when she was taking pictures near the spot where I was sitting. I later realized that I had been the subject of one of her photos. To this day, she claims it's one of her favorite pictures she's ever taken, though I've always been skeptical about that. Writing this now stirs up some mixed feelings. It takes me back to those early memories, and it hurts to think about how little they mean to me now. Back then, though, we became great friends, and during our senior year, we transitioned from friends to partners. Honestly, it felt perfect at the time. After high school, we went to colleges in different states. Surprisingly, it didn't harm our relationship. We kept in touch through constant emails, texts, and phone calls. Eventually, we got married 10 years ago. Melissa is now a professional photographer with her own studio. She's worked as an official photographer in many incredible places over the course of her career. Some of her assignments took her out of the country or to other states. At the time, I never had any reason to doubt her. As I grew older, I came to realize just how beautiful Melissa truly was. Back then, I might have thought she was attractive, but it wasn't the main reason I befriended her, started dating her, or eventually married her. It was her personality that drew me in. Now, looking back, I see that I married someone who was not only beautiful, but also had a captivating presence. However, dating someone so attractive does come with its challenges. You need to feel secure in the relationship. I'll admit that I wasn't very secure in the beginning. It always felt like other men were just one step away from stealing her away from me. In the early years, though, Melissa was incredibly reassuring and transparent. Over time, I stopped worrying about who she worked with or where she went. Everything seemed great at the time. But now, I understand that not everything was as perfect as it appeared. As we were growing older, I started noticing some negative changes in my wife's behavior. It wouldn't be fair to label it as a midlife crisis, but she became increasingly concerned about the future and her legacy. She had never expressed a desire for children before, but suddenly, having kids became a recurring topic of discussion. We had multiple conversations about it, and she started second-guessing her previous decisions. At one point, she asked if she should freeze her eggs. Initially, I declined the idea, but by the third time we talked about it, I realized it wasn't just a passing thought. So I suggested she go ahead, and eventually she did. I felt that her decision was partly driven by concerns about aging and maintaining her physical appearance. She still looked beautiful to me, but I figured there was no harm in her going to the gym if it helped her feel better. So I accepted this change. I've always been an active person. I run and cycle regularly, which brings me a lot of joy. However, the real issue began when she started spending time with some women she met at the gym. She told me everything about them. There were 3 women. One had been married for a long time, and the other 2 were single and in their early 20s. There's nothing inherently wrong with befriending people much younger, but the problem was how quickly she began adopting their lifestyle. My wife, who typically enjoyed reading books or watching movies, started talking about going to bars, hitting the clubs, and having girls' night outs with them. At first, I didn't see it as a problem. I even encouraged her the first couple of times, maybe even the third, if I remember correctly. But when it started becoming a weekly thing, I grew uncomfortable with it. Honestly, I believe a married woman should only engage in these kinds of activities occasionally, especially if her husband isn't accompanying her. There's little good that can come from it. When I realized these outings were becoming a regular occurrence, I had to put my foot down and ask her to stop. I trusted her, but I was concerned about the kind of environment she was exposing herself to and how they might eventually influence her. I didn't know much about these gym friends, so I couldn't say what kind of lifestyle they led, but I worried that it could negatively affect Melissa. Considering how much she was embracing going out and partying, it was clear she didn't take my concerns well. The whole situation escalated into a heated argument. I'm not proud of it, but I told her she might be going through a midlife crisis. She fired back, accusing me of being a controlling and insecure husband. It turned into one of those messy arguments that happen in relationships, and it became obvious that she wasn't going to take what I said seriously. That night, she went out again, despite having told me earlier that it wouldn't happen. It was obvious that she did it either to upset me or simply to get away from me. When she returned much later than usual, she completely avoided me. She went straight to take a shower and then headed to bed. By the time I entered the room, she was already asleep. As she lay there, I couldn't get the thought out of my mind that something had happened that night. I had this unsettling feeling, and knowing how some people can act in moments of anger, I couldn't shake the fear that she might have done something impulsive to get back at me. The idea wouldn't leave my head. I know it sounds crazy, but I decided to check her phone while she was asleep. I had never done anything like that before, but at that moment, it felt like the right time. It was risky, and I felt uneasy. But now I'm glad I took the chance. Most of her conversations were on a messaging app, so that's where I started after unlocking her phone. I came across a group chat called Fit and Fierce, which consisted of 4 members, including her. When I saw it, my heart sank. I felt uneasy, but I didn't have much time to dwell on how I was feeling. The messages were shocking. Honestly, any group chat could cause problems if made public, but these messages were beyond inappropriate. One message in particular caught my eye. It was sent by my wife that very night. At first, I felt hurt, but as I continued reading, my emotions shifted. She wrote, "He's trying to control the wrong person. Honestly, I'm too beautiful to stay loyal. I've spent my entire life tied down and never used my looks the way most women do, to get attention, favors, and more." The other women in the group encouraged her and asked if the guy she was talking about was hot and if he was a big guy. Reading those messages broke me. Even though it's been over a week, they're still fresh in my mind. My chest felt heavy, as if everything around me was collapsing. I had thought her going out was just a small bump in our marriage, something we would eventually work through. But I never imagined it would mark the end of our relationship. This was someone I had known for 20 years. While I had been cherishing our marriage and the life we'd built together, she had been feeling trapped. Understanding this crushed me completely. Her messages made it clear that she had cheated on me. The most painful part? She showed no remorse for it. And from the tone of her texts, it was evident that she was planning to do it again. I'm assuming that night was the first time she cheated on me, but it's entirely possible it wasn't. Maybe it had happened before, perhaps even in the early stages of our relationship. It felt like she regretted not having had her fun in life, as if being in a steady relationship with one man since her teenage years was more of a punishment than a reward. A lot of women might think like this, and that's why I was so confused. I was so overwhelmed at the time that I completely forgot to take screenshots of what I found. I was too caught up in my emotions. The next day, my mood was terrible, but she didn't even bother to ask about it, likely because our argument was still unresolved. That night, however, I managed to gather more evidence from her phone, including messages where she described exactly what had happened and how it felt. She even admitted she couldn't remember the guy's name and laughed about it, as if it were something to be proud of. I was shattered. The thought that I was still in this relationship, stuck in this situation, was unbearable. I kept trying to process how I could move forward knowing this, but it was clear. I couldn't. I had already invested so many years of my life into this relationship, and I couldn't bear to waste any more. Still, I felt the need to make her realize what she had done. I didn't want to hurt her by stooping to her level and cheating back because I knew I was better than that. I had given 10 years to this marriage, and I wasn't going to let it define me. But I couldn't just let her get away with it either. This betrayal wasn't just about hurting me. It was a reflection of who she had become. Sometimes people need to face the truth of their actions. Eventually, I decided to confront Melissa about the whole situation. I waited for the night she returned home. She went straight to the shower, clearly trying to avoid being near me. I stopped her, but I could smell alcohol on her breath and what seemed like a man's cologne. She kept pulling away from me, avoiding eye contact. When I asked her what was going on, she said nothing. I don't know why that response upset me so much. Maybe it was because I had spent the entire week drowning in anxiety, stress, and paranoia, while she seemed completely unaffected. I finally told her outright that I knew she had cheated on me. I laid everything out, everything I had discovered. I even quoted her words back to her. "I'm too beautiful to stay loyal." I asked her if she truly believed she had wasted her prime years on me. I asked why she felt the need to ruin her own marriage like this. Her silence spoke louder than any answer ever could. I told her that I knew I was right, that she was going through a midlife crisis. In my anger, I called her all kinds of names and told her she had single-handedly destroyed our marriage. But at least now she would have the freedom she always seemed to crave, the chance to do whatever she wanted. Throughout my tirade, she just stared at me, saying nothing. Then, out of nowhere, she started crying. Maybe she finally thought about it and realized the risks she was taking were not worth it. Like every cheater, she wanted to have her cake and eat it too, but I wasn't going to let her. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, while I stood over her, berating her. To be honest, I was filled with so much anger. I didn't want to get physical, but my words were as sharp as any blow could have been. In the end, I told her to pack her things and leave. Still, she remained on the floor, crying. So, I went to pack her essentials into a suitcase myself. When I was about 90% done, she crawled into the room and threw herself at my feet. I stood firm. I had already called a ride to take her to her mother's house. I loaded her things into the car, and reluctantly, she left a few days later. I made sure the divorce papers were delivered to her at her mother's house. After that, I dealt with countless calls from her and her mother. Of course, I didn't answer a single one because I had nothing to say to either of them, at least not yet. Now I'm just waiting for the divorce proceedings to start and eventually end so I can finally put this entire ordeal behind me. I never thought I would be in a position to get divorced, but life has a way of surprising you. I need to make sure I close this chapter for good. I'm hurt, but I also need her to feel even more pain than I do. Update. The saga is finally over, and I feel a kind of relief that's hard to put into words. It was a long and painful process, but it's done now. That said, the legal proceedings were no walk in the park. After all her tears, Melissa became incredibly spiteful. It seemed like her only goal was to make my life as difficult as possible. She sent me threatening texts in the middle of the night, talking about how I had ruined her life. At one point, a security camera even caught her parked across the street at 3 a.m. On top of that, neither she nor her lawyer made any effort to reach a reasonable agreement. Instead, they made absurd demands that were impossible to meet. Now I'm finally closing this chapter and trying to move on with my life. The most absurd part was her claim for compensation after such a long marriage. The problem was, I knew I wasn't going to end up paying her a dime. I've always been smart with my finances, so my savings were more than enough. However, as soon as I realized the divorce was inevitable, I worked extensively with my lawyer to creatively secure my assets and keep them out of her reach. Of course, I couldn't shield everything entirely, but we managed to safeguard a significant portion. But this wasn't just about protecting myself. I wanted to take as much from her as I could. She had worked as a photographer for years, not on a small scale either, so she had money. She always did. This time I wanted my share of it. I had no qualms about using the evidence I had gathered, proof of her infidelity, her lack of remorse, and everything else, to push for a favorable settlement. Not only did I aim to secure a good chunk of her assets, but I also pushed to have her cover my legal fees. From the beginning, it was all documented and requested. On top of that, her harassment of me was recorded, though she clearly wasn't thinking that far ahead when she was sitting outside my house in the middle of the night. I knew at that moment she was going to regret every single move she made after cheating on me. The case went before the judge, and my lawyer assured me that things were looking good for us. The judge had a reputation for being firm, and with the evidence of her infidelity, harassment, lack of remorse, and even her ridiculous demands for an amicable separation, it was clear we had the upper hand. The judge granted us everything we asked for. Melissa was left with very little. She kept her car, which she sold shortly afterward. Honestly, it felt satisfying. She was never the type to save money, so she quickly found herself drained of resources. And because I opted for a lump sum instead of alimony, her financial situation dried up fast. She won't be completely broke for long, but I know life won't be easy for her, especially considering how she tried to call me drunk on multiple post-divorce nights. She rambled on about how much she missed me and how miserable her life was now. I kept her on the line for a while, mostly because it was amusing, but in the end, I hung up without saying a word. Right now, I'm on the high ground, and it feels incredible. I didn't deserve to be cheated on, and now it's her turn to feel the pain. Eventually, she'll get her life back together, but I hope she takes a lesson from this. For me, this is a complete victory. She's now dealing with the reality that even after all of this, trying to reach out to me yielded no reaction. It's almost as if she believed she still had the upper hand. But clearly, she doesn't. The game has completely changed now. You gave them more than enough chances to correct their mistakes and take responsibility. Now, it's their turn to face the consequences of their actions. You stood up for your dignity and fought for justice. And now it's time for them to learn their lesson. How did you handle a similar situation? Share your experiences with us in the comments below. Thank you for joining us in today's discussion. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. See you next time.